Hello to everyone out in YouTube land. Welcome to the No Apologies. And Greg, you are you are Daniel number 2 in what we're starting to term our Lion's Den series of interviews. But don't worry, you're not necessarily going to be eaten by anybody. So that's quite okay. It's the ideas that come under the Lion's Den, not the people. As far as being an apologetics, we realize there's always a bit of a contestation and a fight for the Word of God. So, Steve, perhaps you'd like to nice and crisply give our listening audience who may not know Greg and his work a little bit of a helicopter introduction, please.
Well, I suppose when I think of Greg, I actually think of Columbo. And the reason for that is simply the very first time I saw Greg, I think, was at Saddleback Church in the US. As in, I wasn't present. I was just watching a video, and Greg turns up in a trench coat. I even think he dared have a cigar in his hand at that moment, and was giving a presentation on tactics. And I think this is probably now 4 or 5 years ago. And as I said, I'm not actually sure when the presentation, whether that was already a year prior to that. I can't remember. But we had only just started our local apologetics group, and we were just sort of finding our feet and trying to work out. Our passion has always been to distill apologetics down to the level of everyday people as we are ourselves, and in terms of how can we become better at sharing, or even just digging up the ground to get people to be ready to hear the gospel. And a lady in our church pointed me to this video. I watched it. I didn't know Greg Kokel at that stage, and I was absolutely taken just by the whole concept of tactics. And I shortly thereafter bought the book, and we've had several tactics sessions ourselves. And if I think of there's one thing that has really changed the way I personally do apologetics, it's been that, because it's just the whole the tactics is something that you are known for probably around the world now. So you've certainly set something in mind.
Well, thank you for that, Steve. It certainly has changed my life. And I used to be a fairly combative person. And I still have to guard against that. I've been 46 or 47 years now as a Christian, and I still have to guard against that. And I think a lot of folks that are committed to defending the faith are in a defensive posture, and so what the tactics are meant to do is to shift the posture, so to speak, from an argumentative kind of posture to a diplomatic kind of posture. And this is why we talk a lot about at Stand to Reason about being a good ambassador for Christ, because we want our engagements with those who don't share our convictions to look more like diplomacy than D-Day. All right. And I went through many, many years of D-Day, and that generally is not the most effective way to get maybe it worked against the Germans, but it's not going to work in communications with other people, because we're not to be dropping bombs on people. We want to win them, not destroy them. And so when I gradually over a period of time began to shift my approach, and it wasn't like I had a moment or a flash of insight. It's something that happened over time for me. And then taking counsel from the scriptures too. Paul says the Lord's bondservant is not to be quarrelsome, but rather patient when wronged. That's in 2 Timothy chapter 2. If you go back to the 1 Peter passage, chapter 3, where we often use to talk about making a defense for the faith, and that we're always to be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks us, kind of thing. Wow, that's great. But we don't keep reading, because the next couple words are, but with gentleness and with reverence. All right. And so that's to be our posture. And this whole change for me began to shift into a more diplomatic mode. And then the tactical approach gave me the tools that allowed me to accomplish that. I mean, strictly speaking, when you think about it, gentlemen, we are not talking here about apologetics per se, because apologetics is the substance that we are using, but tactics is the technique. And what I noticed is, speaking at a lot of apologetics conferences around the country and some in Europe, there's lots of great information that we get. We get tons of good information. We have a very deep bench. It turns out there's virtually no challenge to Christianity that has not been answered, but thoughtfully and adequately by really smart people. Okay. The problem with those conferences is that they miss something, or there's something that's not provided. And what's not provided is a kind of bridge from the content to the conversation, or from the scholarship to the relationship. And so what the tactical game plan does is it gives you that bridge to enable you to take whatever information that you have from conferences or reading or websites or wherever, and you can get that into play in a way, like I said, that looks more like diplomacy than D-Day. And see, that to me is the key about the tactical element. Certainly in the book, I give all kinds of illustrations and show how the tactics, the array of tactics, the maneuvers that you can use in conversations might play themselves out in specific instances. That's all in the book. The game plan, though, is the first third of the book, and that's where Lieutenant Columbo comes in, because he's such a fabulous, iconic figure. With the trench coat and the cigar and the whole deal, you know.
That's right. That's right.
I like to make the joke, and maybe I made it there at the church where you saw the video there at Rick Warren's church. I said, I tell everybody when I bring the cigar out that it's a plastic cigar, you know, no worries, you know. So, and then I say, kind of jokingly, tongue in cheek, and I hate cigars, and whenever I get a cigar, I always destroy it by fire, you know, one of these numbers, you know, I destroy it by fire. So anyway, it's kind of a lighthearted moment. But the idea is in Columbo, we have an icon, we have a picture, we have a figure for those who are familiar with his style of somebody who kind of comes into a tough situation, which is a murder crime scene. And he's trying to find the bad guy or gal, as the case may be. Yep. But he's kind of coming in under the radar a little bit. He's kind of coming in calm and confused seeming, scratching his head, you know. Actually, it doesn't look like he knows what he's doing. And so he puts everybody at ease, especially the guilty person. And then he starts using his questions. Something about this thing bothers me, you know, that kind of deal. You mind if I ask you a question? I got to find a cigar here. Maybe it'll really. Yeah. And then, you know, he starts gathering information, and then he starts honing in with what he's learning. Now we start honing in, but not in an accusatory way, but in a curious way. Oh, wait a minute. Help me out here. You know, I'm trying to figure this out, you know, and that kind of thing. And for him, he says it's a habit, because after a while it starts to annoy some of the people. And he says, I'm sorry, it's a habit. I can't help it. And this is the habit that I want Christians to get into. The habit of asking questions as a powerful means of maneuvering safely in conversations. And I'm using my words carefully here, because it is a maneuver, and it's powerful, and it's safe. I just wrote a short piece for Stand to Reason, the organization I represent. We send things out every month to our people who ask for it. You can sign up on our website at str.org. But I was just talking about, here's the safest way to engage people as you want to talk to them about your own convictions, share your faith witness, whatever language you want to use. And we all know it's getting tougher out there, right? Not just up on top, but down under, you know. It's the same Christians. It's the same for Christians everywhere, because the secularism is beginning to consume everything. So how do you maneuver safely without risk? Well, if you're asking questions, notice you're not making statements. We make statements, we get in trouble, because people can gainsay the statements, deny them, or they can challenge them, you know, and then we have to defend them. Well, a lot of folks don't know how to do that. So instead, they don't say anything. They sit on the bench and they don't get involved. And so what I've found with people, and you've intimated that already, is that when you begin to employ the tactical game plan, you realize that there are ways to maneuver effectively in a conversation that are also safe, and therefore you're willing to get off the bench and get into play a little bit. If even just a little bit, that's going to make a big difference. And I think
that's very enabling, the way that you have framed that and articulated that, because a lot of people, and present company included, Steve is a very experienced IT programmer. Harvey's a surgeon. Myself, I'm a senior educator at vocational colleges here in Australia. And as an example, I guess just this is reflecting on what you're saying. We pulled ourselves together as a group by way of saying, why is it so hard for the average Christian to be able to explain their faith and get into discussions around their faith? And you articulate two main streams, which I think were important. One, the apologetic, the information is available, and we would absolutely agree with that. And another part of workshops that we've wanted to get into is very much in line with your approach, which is the human interrelationship, the interactive component. And we really want to dig into that this morning in the 45 minutes that we've got left. But before we do that, one whirl up question that we love to give people, because we realize we're Christian family dealing with other Christian family across the waters, across the airwaves, and we really do just like to get to know each other a bit more on a personal, spiritual, philosophical basis, and enjoy the interaction and the exchange of ideas. But before that, who's Greg? Getting to know Greg a little. We'd love to pose this question to you, and we do this to all of our guests in the Lion's Den. If you could fill out the ... dots at the end, if you really knew me, you would know that.
Oh boy. Well, I guess the way I would answer that, and what I'm going to tell you is in a certain sense not something new. On my own radio show, I try to be quite transparent about this. I think there's really nothing special about me spiritually. I have, in a certain sense, a technical ability, just like anybody else that has a skill in a particular area. You might be good at computers, you might be good at surgery, you might be good at business, you might be good. So I'm good in an area that allows me to take ideas apart and reassemble them in an organized way so people can understand that. And that's a gift, all right? What people sometimes mistake is a gift, a spiritual gift, capability for spirituality. Those are different things. And so I have a capability to do something. It seems reasonably effectively. I've been doing it for a long time. However, that doesn't mean I'm kind of up in the clouds somewhere and some kind of ethereal level in a relationship with God. I got my feet on the ground here, just like everybody else. I got kids that, I got to struggle with raising. I got teenage. I got a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old. I mean, this is like weird because I'm an old guy, right? So how did that happen? Well, don't ask me because I don't remember, but it is the circumstance. and so I'm a married guy. Okay. And everybody always talks about, my happily married for 25 years. Well, I don't know that anybody who's been happily married for 25 years. I think they are successfully married and they have periods of happiness and periods of difficulty. And that's just the way life is. And we all know that who are married. Okay. But the people who are in positions of visibility get introduced in these hyper spiritual people. And it's very sweet and it's very kind the way people do that. They assume the best about you and they introduce you. But frankly, it's the thing that you would find out about me, if you really knew me kind of thing, is I'm pretty ordinary. I struggle with prayer like most people do. I hit my prayer time this morning over here on the chair. I had some time in the Word, and I try to follow hard after God in the midst of a lot of challenging circumstances. But being a Christian is hard. It is hard even under the best of circumstances because we live in a fallen world. And we live in a world that is hostile against Christianity, and the culture is very aggressive in this regard. And so we're always fighting if we are serious about our convictions and about walking with Christ. Now, there are a lot of people who are sitting in churches on Sundays that are not serious about that. And so their convictions about the way their so-called Christian convictions don't inform any other areas of their life. And in the rest of their life, they're just going with the flow. So nobody even notices them. So there's not a difficulty. But if you are a follower of Jesus, then just like he got trouble, we're going to get trouble. And he talks about that in many places. Matthew 10 is one of them. The servant is not above the master. They treated me bad, they'll treat you bad. Now, I'm not whining and crying about that. I'm just saying it's a reality. And so people who want to live for Christ faithfully, and all that entails in life, that's a struggle. Okay. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it or candy coat it. I want people to become Christians. But when I tell them that I hope they do become Christians, I tell them, look, it's not easy, but it's real. It's the truth. It's reality. And so that's what I guess one thing I'd like people to know is I'm right down there in the trenches with everybody else. And I take my advice from others who may know a thing or two more than me about how to live the Christian life. So that's, I think, a significant detail that maybe not what you expected, but.
No, that's great. It's wonderful to hear that, Greg, because we are much the same as you in that we're just, in Australia, we'd say we're just ordinary guys, ordinary blokes, wives, kids, various places, jobs. There's nothing new here. I think in that way, if you look at the apostles, the early disciples, not that I'm putting us up on their level in any regards, but from what we can tell, they had to earn a crust. They had to do the passion of the gospel work in the midst of ordinary life and staying alive. It's not a separate thing. The idea of Western professional Christianity, obviously, it's grown out of other areas which we won't get into today. But I really want to say thanks very much for being transparent and letting us know a little bit about Greg the guy. And now what taking your ideas and a lot of those post-it notes or bullet points that you alluded to and highlighted in the first introduction and then just there. Question 2 really leads us to dig a bit more into being ordinary people and how we what are we, earthen jars, right? How we are able to carry such the message of eternity in such ordinary containers. Tell us more then about tactics to communicate the gospel. And there's a few points here, if you can read that as well, just to get you started. Maybe lead us in. You did a little bit. How did the concept of tactics come about? Why use them? Some of this we've already canvassed. How can tactics build confidence in the non-confident Christian, unconfident, inconfident Christian to effectively share their faith? And also, time on the new book as well. Over to you.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot there. I could talk all day about these things. It's really fun for me to discuss them because I think the concepts are great and they're so helpful. And I've got great response from people. As far as the genesis of the project, I hinted at this already, that there was no epiphany, but there was just a slow process of me being self-reflective on different things that I was doing that seemed to be more effective than others, like being nice. That's like a real important detail, Paul says, conduct yourself with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunities. And then he says, let your words always be with grace, seasoned as it were with salt. So he says, be smart, but also be nice. So as I looked at the things that were becoming more effective and actually made things easier for me, then I began to formulate, and this is where my own mind kicks in, my own capabilities, I guess. I began to formulate these things in more categorical ways, so they became concepts that we could employ and transfer these concepts to other people. And so that's kind of the genesis. And as time has gone on, I've kind of stumbled upon more things like that. The book went out initially 10 years ago, and this last year, I guess, right now, the 10-year anniversary this year of the book, I have a new edition, a 10-year anniversary edition of the book. And so I added a whole bunch more tactics, because in 10 years, I discovered some things that I hadn't used in the earlier book, and I was able to articulate things that I was already doing early on, but I didn't have a way of explaining it well. And so I have new tactics in the 10th anniversary edition with titles like Inside Out and Moving Toward the Objection. Is a powerful concept that we use a lot, and others like that. So these things are still in the process of development for me. I'm writing a piece right now I call it Running the Gauntlet. And that's when somebody lays on a whole bunch of charges right in a row. Bang, 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 bang. That's the gauntlet. How do you deal with that? So I'm writing a piece for our people on Stand to Reason. It'll be on our website in a couple of months about running the gauntlet. A short piece, about 800 words. It's a mentoring letter. This is what I call it. But it's a way of helping them. So these are things that are in process, and they just kind of occur, and I practice them, and then I start quantifying it and clarifying it for others to transfer it to others in a discipleship kind of mode. But I'll tell you, one of the most important things that has in the last 10 years, I've really developed more as in a certain sense, a predicate to the whole idea of tactics. And that is a distinction of what I call the difference between harvesting and gardening. Okay. The difference between harvesting and gardening. Okay. Now, here's the rule I go by. In order for there to be any harvest, there's got to be a season of gardening. Now, this is true in any individual's life. I became a Christian when I was 23 years old, when I was a student at UCLA. Okay. I didn't become a Christian the minute I heard the gospel. I had a lot of people that were making contributions to the whole thinking process. And this is what I call the gardening part. And the harvest, actually, on September 28th, 1973, when I became a Christian formally, that was actually pretty easy because the fruit was ripe. You just bump into the fruit, it falls into the basket when it's ripe. The hard part is in the gardening. Now, Jesus talks about this in John chapter 4. After the woman at the well incident, he's telling the disciples, you are about to reap where you did not sow. You are about to reap where you did not sow. Notice in that one statement, he's identifying, though there's one field, and that was Sychar in that case, there were actually two seasons. There was a reaping season that followed a sowing season. And there were two kinds of workers, those who sowed and those who reap. One team, one field, two seasons, two kinds of workers. Okay, now Jesus was telling them, you're going to reap where you didn't sow. You're going to get the easy pickings. Somebody else has done the heavy lifting. Now you get the low-hanging fruit. Okay, and that's the way it sometimes works. But the real work, this is the realization that I came to, had to do with gardening. Now think about this for a moment, though, gentlemen. When we think about evangelism, I mean, I became a Christian during the Jesus movement in Southern California. So evangelism was go out in the street or go out on the beach or go out and about and have little tracts and tell people the simple gospel and see if they want to pray to receive Christ. Notice that our evangelism techniques are harvesting techniques. They are not gardening techniques. But the harvesting techniques presumes that there's a harvest ready right now in that field. Now, there was in Sychar, but that doesn't mean there's this harvest standing right in front of you right now. And a lot of people, if they think that evangelism means challenging people to receive Christ, which, by the way, almost virtually never happened in the New Testament, either the Gospels or the book of Acts. People aren't challenged to receive Christ. The gospel is preached and people believe. Acts 10 is a great example of that. But that's another issue. The point I'm making, though, is if people have the idea that evangelism means they go face to face with somebody and try to get them to sign on the dotted line, that scares them. And so, they'll say praise the Lord and take notes at our evangelism seminars, and they don't do it. And I understand.
Greg, I've seen that in, I guess, messages by well-known Christian pastors. MacArthur would be one of those who sometimes presents the gospel and says, you need to do something about this. I might recommend you look here. And, there's this clear sense of he's not providing someone with, an easy postage stamp to mail themselves to heaven. He's saying, you've got to work this out. Not leaving them blind to do that, but leaving, and he's not coming necessarily from an apologetic point of view. He's, preaching the gospel in his room, in his house, so to speak. And so, no holds barred. It's like John MacArthur with his boxing gloves, in a biblical way, and he will do that. I find that very interesting that you've picked up on that point with regards to proclaiming the gospel. So between the tactics and answering those questions, and then having a clear presentation of the gospel, is there a tension there that you find?
Well, let me clarify. It's because what I just said could be misunderstood. First of all, I'm not against people being invited to receive Christ. I mean, I've done it with others and prayed with others too. But all I'm saying is, if this is not the main biblical motif, this is actually historically new, say 18th century, 19th century, actually, when that whole coming forward and making decisions became the motif. And if we stick with that, we're going to scare a lot of people away. However, if we encourage people that there's a place for gardening, that is for doing a little here and doing a little there, planting, watering, pulling out some weeds here and there. And then we give them a tool that allows them to do that. And that's the tactical approach. Well, then more people are going to get into play. And if we have more gardeners in play, we're going to have a better harvest. I mean, it's just simple math in a certain sense. And yes. So that's why I want to get people off the bench. I want to ask them to do just a little bit. I call it putting a stone in someone's shoe. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to annoy them in a good way, And I tell my university audiences the same thing when I go to a secular university. I'm not here to convert you. I just want to annoy you a little bit, but in a good way.
So speaking of being annoying, Harvey's just popped a question in, and thank you for Harvey sort of sticking with the protocol there while we're working out things this morning. And before you do, Steve, I might see if I can get you to fix your light while Harvey's working on the question as well. Harvey, your idea that you've popped in there, do you want to just share that? And I'll pop it in the chat as well.
That's great. Lovely to hear you speak, Greg. I'm very familiar with your voice. The Defense Rests was a podcast you did with Abdu Murray, and I've listened to both episodes a number of times with the beautiful nuggets of helpful advice that you have shared, and with the 10th anniversary of your updated tactics book as well. And it's really exciting to hear you elaborate on that. The Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons have, of course, long been harvest related, and to some degree gardeners, evangelists, door to door, banging on the door, plying their stuff. But in what ways do you see the parallels between those cults and us, who are supposed to be the real deal? But how do we differ from their techniques so that we're not tarred with the same brush?
No, that's right. This is a liability, I think, of say door-to-door evangelism. I think Christians can do that effectively, and many have done that in the past. I do think the culture, and I'm speaking more for the American culture, but I'm sure that you're facing a similar situation, that the culture has changed significantly so that this approach feels like an intrusion. If somebody knocks on your door who is not invited, and they're there to try to convert you to a different religious view, and it's obvious, then that's going to be off-putting all by itself in the current circumstances. And so therefore, for those who have techniques that entail that kind of thing, say the evangelism explosion, which was popular a couple of decades ago, and people still use it, and maybe in certain parts of the South where Christianity is more part of the cultural fabric, that's effective. But I think we have to ask ourselves the question, is this the best way to engage people now in our own communities? And as you pointed out, there are other people like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons do that. And so to the resident, we feel to them like Jehovah's Witnesses or LDS, right? And those offer a distorted understanding of Christianity. And so to the person in the house who's answering the door, well, this is just another Christian group who says the other Christian groups are wrong and they're right. And so I just think there's the whole scenario is problematic. It's not problematic because the JWs and the Mormons knock on doors and we're knocking on doors. We can use the same. They preach, we preach. They pray, we pray. There's nothing wrong with those things. The question is whether in the culture that we find ourselves in, whether that is an effective way of engaging people, or is it more counterproductive? And I think it's more counterproductive right now. I think there are more effective ways that to go back to Columbo, knocking on your door with a tractor, a survey or something like that. That's like right up front. That isn't Columbo scratching his head, like not knowing what to do or whatever. That's aggressive. Where Columbo didn't come across aggressive. He came across kind of quietly in a certain way. And so contrast that, say, to a conversation you're having with somebody who's not a Christian and they make a controversial statement. Well, there is no God. Okay. Now that's all right. That's a controversial statement. Well, what am I going to do as a Christian who's tactically minded, trying to be an ambassador? I'm going to ask him what he means.
Yeah. Exactly. I would agree. Like after pretty much as soon as I read your book, I started to think, well, what would it be like just to practice some of these things? And I think, the lighting in my room is really treacherous. I work in a loft room, and it's either the sun's either totally glaring into me, or I pull a blind down and it's totally black. I would completely concur with what you just said there, Greg, in the sense that it is the questioning and this kind of unsuspecting approach, like you use the example of Columbo, has worked. Like I literally within weeks saw a difference in the way that I was approaching people with trying to share what I believe in. And instead of trying to come across as this person who's kind of overpowering the conversation, you're actually putting them in the driving seat. Right. And unwittingly, they are listening to you, but think they're actually, still in control. And so you're able to get the information across, right, but you don't actually overpower them with the information. That to me has been amazingly, I'm trying to think of the word. It's also helped me because I am probably a bit like you in that respect. I'm quite a combative kind of person. And my nature is, I've got this information and I've got to get this across to you some way or another. And some way I've got to make you be quiet.
I understand completely. I understand. It's a great observation. And you probably have noticed now, since you've begun doing this, that when you ask for clarification of what somebody means, now in the game plan, this is the first step of the game plan, and I just call it gathering information. That's all you're worried about. You're not worried about the end game. You're not worried about getting somebody to sign on the dotted line and become a Christian. You just want to get the lay of the land. In military terms, you need intel, all right? And so that's all you're doing. And there's no pressure on you. But haven't you noticed? Maybe you haven't. I don't know. But I've noticed frequently when I ask for clarification about a person's statement, they're unable to give it. That is, they don't know what to do with it. If I say, well, what do you mean you're an atheist? Well, what do you mean? I'm an atheist. What kind of atheist are you? Well, there are different kinds of atheists, They don't all think alike. I mean, I'm just saying this now, but in the role play, I just say, what kind of atheist are you? And if they ask me what I mean, I say, well, I mean, some people don't believe in the God of the Bible, and that's what they mean by atheist. Or they don't believe there's a God with a long beard up in the sky somewhere, on a great throne. Well, I don't believe in that God either. Some don't believe in a personal God, but they believe in a force, and there's movies about this. Maybe that's it. Some are just physicalists. You believe that the only thing that exists is the physical material world. So I know that these are some options. And so I want to get clarification. Now, from a tactical perspective, just to let you know, I probably have a fairly good idea what they mean, but I want them to clarify. I want them to do the talking, and I'm listening. So this buys me time. It allows me to stay relaxed. They're the one who's doing the talking, and I'm listening. Now, look if I am not given anything in that response that I think I could use to go a step further, guess what? I'm not going to go any further. And that happens to me. This is what I mean by safety. And when you're thinking about gardening, you are not committed to going the distance. You're just open to God to doing what you can do in that moment. Think about gardening. You walk out into your garden, you say, I want to pull a few weeds. And then you look around, you say, I don't see any weeds. All right, I'll come back tomorrow. Maybe there'll be some weeds. So you commit to doing what you can. And if nothing is available to do, then you move on. And this is kind of the low stress atmosphere that I want to create for people. Now, chances are there's going to be some weeds. And if you have a little education, you could see the weeds. And then in your conversation with people. And then you can begin always using questions to take another step. So if the person describes to me what he means by God, and he says, well, I mean, there is no immaterial God because there are no immaterial things. All we have is this stuff in the physical world around us that our five senses have access to. That's it. That's it. Nothing else is real. Okay, now I know his view. He's a materialist or a physicalist is these terms that we use to describe people who believe that way. Okay, but I have another question now. Why would you think that there's nothing in the world but material things? I'm just curious. I'd like to get an idea how they're thinking about these things. So you believe there's no non-physical stuff. Is that right? Yeah, that's me. Why would you think that? Now, I don't know what he's going to say, but a lot of times what I get back is silence, the sounds of silence,
Exactly.
Because they've never thought about this. They are repeating things they've heard other people say. And by the way, if a Christian is just asking questions to get information, which is what I'm doing, I can't proceed in a discussion unless I have a clear picture of the lay of the land, and the other person is not able to answer even the most simple questions about his own view, do you think that might trouble him a little bit? Think that might be a little stone in his shoe to get him thinking? And this, of course, is what happens. Now, I'm not looking for a conversion. I think of it this way, gentlemen, and every one of your Christian listeners who engages people for the gospel's sake will be familiar with this. You face a critic that raises an issue that you cannot answer, and you smile and do your best, and you put on your game face, and you try to stay and look confident, and then when you walk away, you're going, oh my goodness, maybe they're right. I can't answer that. You don't worry about it in front of them. You worry about it when you're away from them. Okay, now what has that atheist or skeptic done? That skeptic has put a stone in your shoe. Mm-hmm. He's annoyed you. He's got you thinking about your views as to whether they're right or they're wrong. And the same thing works in reverse. And that's all I'm trying to do. I don't expect the atheist to say, oh, you got a good point there, man. I got to rethink my worldview. I don't expect them to do that. What I do expect, though, is if I ask a fair question and I probe with questions at a weakness in their view, for them to go away and by the work of the Holy Spirit touching that nerve, they're going to be thinking about it. And that happened to me.
No, I think that's
a lot of people.
I think that's a very good way of describing things. And I wonder, I think this comment that's come in from Allison on YouTube may have just been addressed by what you were talking about there. Is there anything else you'd like to add in clarification to that particular question?
Right. what Allison is asking about, I get this question a lot, and what she's asking about is what are the kind of leading questions, the questions that will lead into a spiritual conversation. Okay. Now, I don't have many of those. And I mean, I'll give her one and you all one in just a moment that it might be useful to you. But the liability of leading questions is that they're transparent. People realize that you're leading them somewhere, that you want to go about your point of view against theirs. Okay. And that's why instead of having in stock leading questions to introduce a conversation, I have questions in my mind pertaining to particular issues that may come up that I can begin to ask when they do come up to turn the conversation into something spiritually meaningful. And so somebody could say, I can't believe there is so much evil in the world. I can't believe it. How could that be? You know, every time you turn around, something terrible is happening. And then I might say, wait, I'm confused by your statement. Why? Well, you really believe there's evil in the world? Yeah, of course there is. It's obvious. They say, okay, what do you mean by evil? Well, I mean like rape and murder and torture and that kind of stuff. Well, wait a minute. No, you just gave me examples of evil. You didn't tell me what evil was, why those things are examples of evil. And I think about it for a moment. They say, well, you know, that shouldn't be that way. It ain't the way it's supposed to be. And then when they say it ain't the way it's supposed to be, then I can ask them, wait, I thought you're an atheist. I am. Of course I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist because of all the evil in the world. I said, well, wait, that confuses me. Help me out here. If you're an atheist, there is no God. But you just said evil is when things aren't the way they're supposed to be. So who's the one who's supposing things to be one way that it's not? I don't know if you see the point here. You can't have a way they're supposed to be unless you got a sposer, so to speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I am aware of a liability in that person's point of view, but what I'm doing is I'm just asking questions to help that person to see a problem with their view that they hadn't seen before. That's basically what I'm doing. And I'm taking an advantage largely of the circumstances that present themselves to me in casual conversation with people, but I'm always using questions. Now, the one question I was going to suggest for Allison, if you want to use this to kind of get into a spiritual conversation, is a very simple question. And the way I would ask it is this. I'd first ask permission if I can ask that person a question, and it might be kind of a personal question. Do you mind if I ask you a question? Maybe it's personal, and if you don't want to answer, that's all right. But I've asked this of a lot of people, and I'm very curious about people's responses. No, go ahead. What's the question? Okay, here it is. What do you think happens when you die? What do you think happens when you die? Very open-ended, by the way, and non-confrontive. We're gathering information. And then they'll tell us. Maybe they say, well, I don't know. Do you have any suspicion at all? No, I have no idea what's going to happen. Or they might say you go to heaven or hell, or you might say that you get reincarnated. I don't know. We're in information gathering mode here. And by the way, when they explain what they think happens when they die, and you might ask some more questions like, what do you mean by that, to get clear on their view, then you might ask a follow-up question. And this is the second step of the game plan. What makes you think that's what happens when we die? So you're asking for the reason for their view.
I think that's actually leads us wonderfully into this next question here. And Harvey has a few points that can come along with this as well in the side chat as well. But this one here, comment on how you deal with relativism. And I think this Columbo questioning technique is seems ideally suited for that. But Harvey, did you want to add your thoughts and comments as well?
Well, thank you, Greg. Yeah. At the moment, there's quite a charged atmosphere with people who are extremely opinionated on what they think is right or wrong with the culture. And it's led to a phenomenon, as you know, called cancel culturing, where individuals are blacklisted, basically edited out and cancelled. And individuals can be very sensitive to triggers, which will ultimately lead to just simply a shutdown conversation, turn away and go away. And this tactic seems to be a great antidote to this type of knee-jerk rejection
Right.
of Christians attempting to share their faith in any way. Because if you've tried it once and the person's defenses are up, it's him again. He's going to steer this conversation around to Jesus. I can tell. So let's just shut him down away. That desperate attempt to avoid any serious spiritual conversation. You must have come across this.
Well, there's no silver bullet here. And what I mean by that is there is no technique that's going to give you effective access to a person in every circumstance. We have, especially with the cancel culture. And by the way, just think of it. 6 months ago, who would have ever thought that there would be a thing called the cancel culture? These things are changing so rapidly, and the abuse is so aggressive and so pervasive. It's hard to keep our balance in the midst of it. Sometimes there is no opening. I don't personally think that every engagement is a divine appointment. Sometimes they are just ships passing in the night, and sometimes what's better is to not answer challenges because of the results. Read Proverbs. Proverbs has a lot of good information about this kind of thing. He says, when you correct a fool, here's what's going to happen. They're either going to laugh at you or they're going to yell at you. All right? That's in Proverbs. And so sometimes the best way is just to remain silent. Now, how do you know when to do that? This is just a judgment you make in the moment with the best wisdom that the Holy Spirit gives you. And you just do your best. That's all. Actually, Proverbs says a lot about shutting up. Be quiet, and many times that's the best answer, particularly when you're dealing with somebody who's really angry and there's a bunch of them. When you're dealing with somebody on their own in private, it's a different dynamic. And then your calm tones, a harsh word stirs of anger, but a gentle answer turns away wrath. So your calm tones and your gracious questions and your attentive manner can calm things down and get people to listen. And that's what makes an opportunity. In the cancel culture, lots of confrontations present no meaningful opportunity. But bide your time, be gracious. Don't react in kind. Don't bruise the fruit, so to speak. Don't fulfill the caricature of Christians. Rather, show grace. And that alone is going to help. When you have an opportunity to ask a question that subtly, either meant to clarify their point of view or subtly challenges their point of view, I'll give you an example now, then go ahead and do that. So for example, in this whole racial thing that's going on right now, here's a fair question. What is it? I agree. I'm going to role play this now. I agree with you that racism is a terrible evil. Okay. Now I'm a white guy saying this. I'm a white straight guy. I'm a white straight Christian guy. I mean, so I got all kinds of bad intersections right now going for me. But I'm just going to say, I think it's a terrible evil. But let me ask you this question. What is it about racism that makes it evil? Now, there's my question. Okay. Now, I think when people think about it for a little while, they're going to realize that the thing that's evil about racism is it treats a valuable human being in an inhumane and unjust way based on something that is not morally consequential, like their skin color. Okay. So you're canceling somebody, to use the language now, you're canceling a black person because he's black. Okay. Sure. That's not just. Well, I agree with them. It is not just. But what about how are we going to deal with that problem? Okay. And my point here is it okay to deal with injustice by doing another injustice? That's my question. In other words, you are canceling me because of my skin color. Is that also an injustice? So how do you satisfy injustice with injustice? And see, now that's a very fair question. And I'm not taking sides with the question on the magnitude of racism or white supremacy in any given culture. I'm not even getting there. I'm just asking about the behaviors, because what's happening now is that in response to injustice, there is massive injustice being done. It's returning evil for evil. Okay. I don't want to make that an accusation, though it would be legitimate, because then people get defensive. But if I ask the question the way I did, then it requires them to think it through and answer it and give a justification. How is it just to do the very same thing to others based on their skin color that you are claiming they have been doing to the oppressed groups? That's a question. And now I'm waiting for an answer for that. Now, I may not get any further in the conversation, but if I walk away, now I've left something important for them to chew on with regards to this issue. They might disregard it. They might take it to heart. I don't know. That's up to them and God. I just do my job. I let God do his.
So, Greg, while we're on that, we just want to push that question just a little bit further into home plate, because when we're talking about apologetics and tactics, we are talking about having an agreed central point. What are the apologetics about? What are the central tenets of Christianity? We have an apologetic for an agreed something, not just this vague notion of theism or this vague notion of a happy Jesus or something like that. Like there's a core center, but in that, Christians are being polarized. And I thought for our last 5 minutes, 7 minutes, Harvey, Steve, Greg, we might just first of all throw this to you, Greg, and then just engage in a bit more of an open dialogue at this point about the divergence that and the schisms that current political activism, particularly the charged atmosphere of Western politics at the moment, not automated telemachine, but at the moment, with Christians are divided along political lines. How does tactics engage in that? How can it be helpful?
Well, the tactical approach, which is there's 3 steps to the game plan. The first one is to gather information, and we use a question like, "What do you mean by that? Tell me more," kind of thing. The second one is what I call reversing the burden of proof, and that is when they make a claim, instead of us taking the responsibility to refute the claim,
yes,
then I'm going to ask them why they think the claim is true. Okay, so if they say I'm a racist, I could say, no, I'm not. Or I could say, what would make you think that I'm a racist? Okay, notice how now I put the ball in their court, and I'm not taking the burden to prove I'm not what they claim. I'm letting them take the burden of proof for what they do claim. So that's the second step. And by the way, those are very simple. They can be used with virtually any issue that you're facing, political, non-political, spiritual. This is a broad application, frankly, these tactical maneuvers. They can be used in business, for that matter. I have a lot of people that have told me that this is what they were trained to do in sales, and it's legitimate. The third use of the tactical approach, particularly the questions, this is the third step of the game plan, is that we are using questions to make a point. We are using questions to make a point. Now, of course, in this case, you have to know the point that you're trying to make. And it might be you're trying to make a point for your side, or you're trying to make the point that their view fails in some fashion. Okay. Now, actually, as I've role played a little bit here in our session, I've done that a couple of times, and raised some questions. This can be used. It doesn't matter the political environment or the religious environment. These things are utterly flexible to all of these circumstances. All right. And especially if we have the attitude of a diplomat in the way we engage, that manner, an attractive manner, we call it at Stand to Reason. That manner itself is going to be a protective element for us in these hostile environments. If we don't take offense, if we don't get defensive, if we don't start arguing and quarreling and interrupting and get nasty and call names and all of that, then that's going to make our side look that much more compelling. So there is a tactical maneuvering element here. There's a knowledge element, but there's also a character element that makes this effective, and all are important. Now, the question here, how is tactics working? Well, in one sense, tactics always work to do what I want them to do. To ask about whatever, if to ask, does any particular thing work? It always depends on what you mean. Does Jesus work? Well, what do you want him to do? He works for what he was intended to do, but he doesn't work for other things. He's not going to make your life easy. If you want Jesus to make your life easy, forget about that. He doesn't work for that. But that's not his goal. Same thing with tactics. Tactics is a game plan and a series of maneuvers that allows you to engage productively in a conversation without getting in fights. It's the best, in my view, the best way to engage productively. Does it work to do that? Yes, it always works to help me engage productively. That means I touch on things that really matter. I conduct myself with wisdom towards outsiders in that regard. That's Paul in Colossians chapter 4. Does that mean it's going to win them to Christ? No, because the goal of tactics is not to win them to Christ. The goal of tactics is to be a good ambassador for Christ. God's job is to win them, not mine.
Yeah,
so I keep those distinct. Yeah. But I will say that God uses the tactics so very often, and that's what's encouraging about it.
Oh, well said, Greg. Well said.
I think probably that the very fact that our political environment is so charged and is so hostile at the moment, and people have sort of, in some ways, lost the art of having a good debate because they're frightened of that. I think that the tactics actually, as in the whole idea of asking questions and making people think of the consequences of their own views, which they very rarely do. And I think that in my personal experience, that's what's been the wedge in the door at that moment, where people suddenly realize, hang on a minute, I haven't actually thought this through. Actually, I've just maybe picked it up from somebody else, or I've read it in the newspaper, or I've seen it on TV, but I've not actually thought this through. And it actually isn't what I really think. And it opens the door for them to then suddenly, sometimes in the right moment, ask you the question.
So that's a fabulous observation, Steve. I run into this frequently. By the way, Christians are in the same boat, where we repeat the slogans of our communities, and we haven't thought through what we believe. But just to make a distinction for your listeners or your viewers, is that I've been talking about the tactical game plan and tactics. Well, those are two different things. The tactical game plan is one tactic. We call it the Colombo tactic after the infamous Lieutenant Colombo. But there are other tactics that abet the game plan, and they serve largely to help you find out what is wrong with a person's view, or how to deal with people that are hard to deal with, like a steamroller, for example, if somebody who interrupts a lot. Sometimes people have a point of view that is self-refuting. For simplest example is people say there is no truth. Well, I have a question for that. Is that true?
That's right.
I mean, it's not a trick. It's a legitimate question. And so that's the suicide tactic. Then we have, we have a whole host of called Rhodes Scholar and Just the Facts Ma'am, and Taking the Roof Off, and Inside Out, and What a Friend We Have in Jesus. These are all maneuvers that you can employ, keeping in mind the Colombo method of employing them. And so that's how they all work together.
Greg, thank you so much for that. I'm just aware, with my facilitator's blue hat on here, we've hit our 8 o'clock mark in the morning here in Eastern Seaboard in Australia. You must be getting towards sleepy time where you are now.
Well, actually, it's not. It's only about 3 in the afternoon, so I'm just getting rolling here. No worries.
Yeah, okay, I say that as a grandfather recently. I feel 3 in the afternoon is poppy nap time. But thank you so much for being with us. We highly value your time and your input. I'd just like to say thanks so much for coming on.
Well, it is so sweet of you to have me, and I really enjoy talking with you and with your audience. I'm available to you. So if you want to do this again sometime, I'm at your service.
That would be just wonderful. We might move and dig into a few different things there. I see, you can see Harvey's got himself a surgery call that's come in. Someone needs a baby delivered. To our folks listening out there in YouTube land, jump on to Stand to Reason's website, str.org. Look for Greg on YouTube, which I've been doing most recently, and really enjoying my time watching those videos and getting a communications refresher, but it's more than that, much more than that. Coming up next, our next interview will be with creation.com, Dr. Mark Harwood, looking at some key, I guess we'd call it five classic hard to answer questions that creation.com tackle wonderfully and with ease. We'll let you know more about that later, but as a final wrap up, Greg Kokel, thank you so much for your time, and we pray God's richest blessing on you, your team, and your ministry efforts moving forward to the rest of 2020 and beyond.
Well, thank you, and I salute you for the work you're doing. Keep up the good work, gentlemen.
Thanks very much, Greg. God bless, and God bless to everyone listening out in YouTube land.